Okay, let's hop on one more Mishnah today. Perek Zayin, Mishnah Gimel. We're in the midst of outlining and defining the methods of the Daled Mises Bezdin. Now the Mishnah says mitzvahs hane'erogim. Mitzvahs hane'erogim. This is the procedure for those who have been sentenced to beheading. To beheading. Hereg. Hereg is according to the Lashon HaMishnah Seif. Skila Seifa Hereg v'Cheleg. Hereg is beheading. So this is the procedure that was done. This was the procedure that was done for those that were mechuyev Rahman al to be beheaded. What did they do? So according to the Tanakama, hayomatizin es oishu b'saif kederech shamalchus oisa. They would cut off his head with a sword while he was standing, just as the government did when it executed someone. Rabbi Yehuda immediately responds to this and says, Nivul huzeh. Nivul huzeh. This kind of beheading is disgraceful. Why is it disgraceful? Because his headless body would then fall to the ground, and this is the bigger bizoyin. This is the bigger nivul. Ela manichin es rosh al asada, but rather, says Rabbi Yehuda, when he's lying down, when he's lying face down, we place his head on a block, v'koitzet bakufit, and his head is chopped off with an axe. So the Chachamim said immediately to Rabbi Yehuda, Amar loi, you told us, Nivul huzeh? What we respond to you is, Ein misa minuvelas mezu. There's no death more disgraceful than that. So what's going on here? Let's try to explain a little bit. An axe breaks the bones at the back of the neck, making the corpse even more repulsive than it has been. More repulsive than it has to be. In other words, it adds to nivul hameis. It adds tsar. It adds disgrace. A sword, on the other hand, merely cuts off the front of the neck, killing the person by severing his windpipe and his food pipe quickly. For this reason, when a sword is used, the condemned must be erect with the front of his neck exposed. He cannot, as Rabbi Yehuda says, lie down on a block. Now, the truth of the matter is that Rabbi Yehuda agrees that beheading with an axe is repulsive, but nevertheless, he forbids using a sword in place of an axe. Why? Because this was the Maise Knainim. Because this is the way the Canaanites beheaded criminals, with a sword. And the Torah tells us in Vayikra Yudches, that you shall not go in the ways of the Knaanim. You shall not follow the laws of the Knaanim. Now, the truth of the matter is that this pasuk refers to practices that relate to worshiping idols, but the Chachamim prohibited certain other Canaanite customs as well, says the Meiri. So to avoid copying the Canaanites, Rabbi Yehuda prohibits beheading with a sword and requires an axe to be used instead. Now, although Rabbi Yehuda said that this kind of beheading is disgraceful, that was not his main reason to prohibit using a sword. That was just agavurcha. Rather, he meant that beheading with a sword is also disgraceful. And so nothing is gained by using a sword. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we therefore use an axe instead to avoid copying the Knaanim. The Chachomim, however, learn from the psukim of the Torah that beheading should be done with a sword, and therefore the prohibition of copying the Canaanites does not apply here. Favos, because we use a sword not to copy the Canaanites, but we use a sword in order to follow the instructions of the Torah as to what is to be done when someone is mechuyav hereg, when someone is mechuyav beheading. So that was as far as mitzvahs aneherogim. Now says the Mishnah, mitzvahs anechenokim. What is the procedure for those that are mechuyav Rahman al-Islam? Strangling, chenek is strangling. Says the Mishnah, mitzvahs anechenokim. This is the procedure for those who have been sentenced to strangling. It'll be familiar to us because we saw it a Mishnah ago, where the Mishnah was talking about the Nishkolin, that prior, the Mishnah was talking about Nitzrofim, that prior to the actual Maisa Asreifa of the Madlikis Apsila V'Zorka L'Tochpiv, so the Tanakama said that we would take a Suda, one pulling on one side, one pulling on the other. So we're familiar with that, and that's what's going to happen now, when the Mishnah gives us the definition of what is Nechanokin. They would sink this mechuyev chenek into a pile of zevel until his knees, so he should not be able to move his legs. Again, because if he moves around, he will suffer longer than necessary. And we stressed in the previous Mishnah that we don't want to add additional tzar. We don't want to add additional suffering beyond that which already is taking place in front of our eyes. So you should not be able to move and cause vital suffering. And they would put a scarf, a rough scarf, into a soft scarf, and wind the scarves around his neck. Someone is standing on one side, pulls the scarves towards himself, and someone standing on the opposite side pulls the scarves towards himself, until they've strangled him and his soul leaves the body. So that is the mitzvahs anechenokim.